I'm sixth generation Idahoan, right? So I'll be the first to admit that I'm a little biased when it comes to how Idaho is categorized and spoken about. And the biggest misconception is that Idaho is somehow analogous to the South. That yes, Confederates helped establish Idaho, but as did those from the North. It was simply people who were avoiding the Civil War came to Idaho. And probably the biggest misconception about Idaho as far as it being analogous to the South is that according to the NAACP, Idaho is one of 7 states that has no record of a black person being lynched in the state of Idaho. I'm not saying we were some bastion of racial panacea where everybody got along great and it was a utopia. No, because they were absolutely horrendous to the Chinese, because once upon a time, Idaho was 30% Chinese. But it is not. And then between 1885 and 1910, went from 30% to 0. They did suffer lynchings, race riots, forced exclusion and removal from the state. So it's not that Idaho was somehow utopia, it's just that as it pertains to black people in the history of America, Idaho afforded an opportunity that was not afforded us elsewhere. The 3 biggest things that contribute to people being upwardly mobile or being able to thrive are land ownership, school, education, and jobs. Idaho afforded those 3 things to blacks well ahead of the rest of the nation. And because of that, outcomes are far different. And this absence of an existential threat, this church was established in 1909, but the building was physically erected in 1921. And those who are fans of history remember that's the same year the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots. So that kind of shows you the contrast of black in Idaho and black America. And Tulsa wasn't an isolated incident. It was one of like 33 race riots that had gone on after Reconstruction. It was a system to ensure that blacks would be put back in their place, right? That didn't happen here. And when people want to talk about Idaho, they have to take that in consideration and be like, okay, what is it that we're talking about? Is it based on fact? And so what we're trying to do, especially with Black History Month, is bring this to the forefront, because again, I said I'm a little biased regarding Idaho, and that Idaho has a lot of aspects to it that are contrary to the narrative and that you wouldn't find elsewhere. And probably the biggest thing is like the fact that Idaho has several natural wonders or natural resources that are named after a black miner that came here in the 1870s. His name was George Washington Blackman, but there's a Blackman's Peak, Washington Creek, Blackman Basin, Washington Basin. He came to Stanley, Idaho originally and was mining, but all these places are named after a black person, which is rare, and especially in a time when you have this conflict over historical monuments or places that are named after Confederates or slaveholders, whatever. Idaho is on the total other end of that spectrum. What we're doing now, like our whole arc for the whole year, is trying to illustrate that difference as far as like black America, black Idaho, and that contrary to what everybody keeps trying to push, those who have been left out is not exclusively related to your ethnic group. It's about if you're poor, you're poor. If you're able to thrive, you're able to thrive, and if you're rich, you're rich. So what we're doing is trying to use that historical narrative and afford those opportunities to those regardless of ethnic persuasion, because it's now a socioeconomic issue. If you want to look at any of the predictors, any of the lifestyle or life quality measures, it directly correlates with how much money you have or do not have. And in order to be upwardly mobile in the modern day, you still have to have access to education, jobs, and then that will in turn lead to land ownership. And so this haranguing the other side or labeling everybody an oppressor or the oppressed and not looking at the nuance, and somehow that all white people have been born with like a $5 million trust fund, and that all black people have been born 2 feet from bondage. Stop. That's not going to fix anything, and it does nothing other than sell books and book tours as opposed to really addressing the underlying problem. And so everything we're trying to do now, that's why I got this whole place at the table display. That was actually donated by Chuck Winder, who's head of the Senate here in Idaho. At the end of the day, that's what everybody's looking for, right? An opportunity for their kids and for their family to thrive and to have a voice at that table of how their community thrives or builds or makes moves, right? And the reason why we didn't go with a lateral table or a round table is because people have to also understand when you're coming to a given situation, there is a hierarchy. There's hierarchy in everything. There's hierarchy in nature. And so to contribute, You have to first and foremost familiarize yourself with how things work, and you can't assume that when you're first included, you're going to directly be at the head of the table, right? You may end up there, but you have to contribute to get there, right? And being the first one's all well and dandy, but most importantly, make sure you're not the last. So have something tangible and palpable to contribute, and that's why we're in this whole a place at the table, because that's what Idaho afforded blacks.